The morning I signed the papers that made me $15 million richer, I sat alone at my kitchen table, eating cold oatmeal from a chipped bowl my late wife Alina had bought at a yard sale in 1987. I didn't pop champagne. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, 71 years old, watching the sun come up over my backyard garden, and I thought about how none of it meant what it was supposed to mean. That was the morning everything was about to fall apart in ways I never saw coming, starting with a phone call from the one man I thought I could trust with my life. My name is Gerald Harmon. For 38 years, I built Harmon precision parts from a two-car garage in Dayton, Ohio, into one of the most respected mid-sized manufacturing companies in the Midwest. We made specialized components for aerospace clients, tiny, intricate things that had to be perfect, because imperfection in my industry didn't mean a product recall. It meant a catastrophe 30,000 feet in the air. I had poured everything into that company, my back, my weekends, my hair. 3 months after Alina passed from pancreatic cancer in 2019, I was back at the plant at 6 in the morning, because sitting in a quiet house was a kind of grief I didn't have the vocabulary for. Work was the only language I still knew how to speak. When the acquisition offer came from Meridian Aerospace Group in the fall of last year, it wasn't a surprise. I had been quietly preparing for it for 2 years, $15 million for full acquisition of assets, intellectual property, and client contracts. Clean, fair, the number my financial advisor said I should hold out for. I handed the deal to my lawyer of 22 years, a man named Douglas Pratt. Douglas was 64, silver-haired, and the kind of man who made you feel safe just by being in the same room. We had been through everything together: Alina's estate, a lawsuit from a former supplier, a tax dispute with the IRS that had aged me 5 years. I trusted Douglas Pratt the way I trusted very few people in this world, completely, without conditions. Which is why, when he called me 3 days before the final signing, what he said knocked the air straight out of my chest. "Gerald," he said, his voice lower than usual, careful in a way that made me sit up straighter. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." "All right," I said. "When this deal closes, when word gets out about the sale, I need you to tell people it went badly, that you sold at a loss, that Harmon Precision went under and you barely recovered what you put in." He paused. "I need you to tell my son you went bankrupt." The silence that followed was so long, I thought the call had dropped. "Douglas," I finally said, "what on earth are you talking about? I know how this sounds, but I'm asking you, as your friend, as someone who has been in your corner for over 2 decades, please, just do this one thing for me." I asked him why. He wouldn't tell me. He said it was complicated. He said he would explain everything soon, but for now he just needed my word. When I pressed him harder, his voice cracked in a way I had never heard from Douglas Pratt in all the years I'd known him, and that crack, that fracture in a man I had always thought unbreakable, frightened me more than anything he had said. I told him I needed time to think. He told me he didn't have much time to give me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in Alina's side of the bed. I still slept only on my side 3 years later, and stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of it. Douglas had a son named Carter, 29 years old, handsome, charming in the easy way of young men who had never been told no. I had met Carter at Douglas's Christmas parties over the years. A finance guy, I recalled, private equity, always dressed like he had somewhere more important to be. The next morning, I called my grandson Marcus. He was 26, worked in tech in Columbus, and had a gift for finding information that I had always found both impressive and slightly alarming. I didn't tell him everything. I just gave him Carter Pratt's name and said I needed to understand his professional situation. Marcus called me back in 4 hours. "Grandpa," he said slowly, "where did you get this name?" "Why?" "Because Carter Pratt has been running a private fund that, from what I can tell, is in serious trouble. There are posts on a finance forum from investors who say they haven't received statements in months. Someone filed a complaint with the SEC 3 weeks ago." A pause. The fund's primary pitch to investors was that it had exclusive deal flow with high-net-worth manufacturing exits in the Midwest. I set the phone down on the kitchen table. and stared at my garden for a long time. Douglas's son had been using his father's client relationships, using me, my reputation, my name, without my knowledge, to attract investors into a fund. And now something had gone wrong. And if word got out that Gerald Harmon had sold for $15 million instead of going bankrupt, the story Carter had been telling his investors would unravel. People would ask questions. The SEC would have a clearer thread to pull. Douglas wasn't asking me to protect his son from embarrassment. He was asking me to protect his son from federal investigation. I drove to Douglas's office the next morning without calling ahead. His assistant tried to stop me. I walked past her. He was at his desk when I came in. He looked up, and I saw it immediately, the resignation in his eyes, the exhaustion of a man who had already lived through the worst of this and was just waiting for the rest of it to arrive. I know, I said. I didn't sit down. I know about Carter's fund. I know about the investors. I know about the SEC complaint. Douglas closed his eyes. How long? I asked. I found out 6 weeks ago. His voice was barely above a whisper. He told me what he'd done. He asked me to help him manage it. I told him I couldn't, that what he'd done was wrong, that he'd used my clients without consent. He opened his eyes. But he's my son, Gerald. He is my son. I understand that, I said. And God help me, I did. I had children. I had a son who had made mistakes that cost me sleep and money and nights on my knees. But what you asked me to do was suborn fraud. You asked me to be a prop in a lie that could send your son to prison for even longer once they unraveled it. Because they would unravel it, Douglas. They always do. He didn't answer. There was nothing to say. I'm going to close my deal, I told him, truthfully, and I am not going to be the man who covers for this, but I am also not going to be the man who calls the SEC on you. I picked up my coat from the chair. What you do next, what Carter does next, that's between you two and whatever conscience you have left, but I am done. I walked out. I didn't look back. The deal closed 4 days later. $15 million, exactly as negotiated. My new attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Osa, whom Marcus recommended, handled the final paperwork without a single complication. I heard through mutual contacts, about 6 weeks later, that Carter Pratt had retained a criminal defense attorney. The SEC investigation was formal by then. Douglas had quietly resigned from his practice and was, from what I understood, cooperating with authorities. I didn't feel good about it. I want to be clear about that. There is nothing satisfying about watching a man you respected for 2 decades be consumed by his son's choices and his own inability to say no to a child he loved too much to hold accountable. I knew something about loving children, so much it made you stupid. Elena used to say that was the tax you paid for parenthood, that love made fools of the wisest people. She was right. She was almost always right. I still eat breakfast at that kitchen table. Cold oatmeal, most mornings. Old habits don't surrender easily. I look out at Elena's garden, which I have kept up as best as a 71-year-old man with bad knees can manage, and I think about what it means to build something honest in a world that constantly offers you easier, shadier paths. 38 years, every component we made was perfect, because imperfection wasn't an option, not at 30,000 feet. I decided, a long time ago, that I would live my life the same way. $15 million didn't change that, neither did a lawyer who forgot it. Some things you just don't negotiate.